I'd like to call this meeting to order.
House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule sous forme hybride.
Today's meeting will take place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of November 25th, 2021, with members attending in person or on Zoom. Our deliberations will be published on the House of Commons website. You will see.
And in light of the recommendations from health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on Friday, January 28th, 2022, to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person are to maintain 2-meter physical distancing, must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room, and it is highly recommended that the mask be worn at all times, including when seated, and must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the provided hand sanitizer in the room. En tant que président,
as chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. For those who are participating online, I would like to remind you of certain rules. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available. At the bottom of the screen, you can select the floor sound, English or French. If interpretation services are interrupted, please let me know and we will do the necessary to resume interpretation before continuing with our work. For people who participate in the room, proceed as you normally would when the whole committee is there in person. Before speaking, wait till I recognize you by your name. If you're participating over Zoom, click on the microphone button to turn on your mic. For the people who are in the room, the agent responsible for procedure will turn on your mic for you. I would like to remind you that all comments of members must be addressed to the chair. And when you speak, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you don't speak, make sure your microphone is turned off. With regards to the speakers list, the clerk and I will do our best to maintain a speaking order for all members, whether they be participating in person or online.
Challenges arise, please advise me. Please note that we may need to suspend a few minutes as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Donc, conformément.
So, pursuant to Standing Order 108, the committee is starting its study on the government work to promote and protect the use of French in Canada. So I'd like to welcome our witnesses. Today we have on video conference, speaking on their own behalf, Mr. Guillaume Rousseau, Associate Professor of the University of Sherbrooke from the Faculty of Law. We also have Marc Termotte, Associate Professor of Demography from the University of Montreal. I think this is the first time in 6 years that he has spoken before this committee. And we also have the president of the Fédération des Associations de Juristes d'Expression Française et de Common Law, Inc., Daniel Boivin, who has been a witness here before. I would like to remind you that you have a 5-minute opening statement, and then we will proceed with questions. Committee members will be able to ask you questions, And I'd like to advise you that when you have about a minute left, I will let you know as politely as possible and try not to interrupt too abruptly. So welcome to our members and welcome to witnesses. So I'd like to start in reverse alphabetical order. So 5 minutes go to Mr. Termotte. You have the floor. Hello, I'd like to thank the members of the committee. Can you hear me? Thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor for me. But you know that you're taking a risk because inviting a demographer is always risky. So I'll go straight to the heart of the matter. It is difficult to argue that the use of French in Quebec is declining. But we have to make some distinctions. The use of language in the private space and the use of language in the public space needs to be looked at. As demographers, we study the use of language in private spaces. Why? Because the language one speaks at home is the language that the children use. So when you're looking at long-term perspectives, this is the essential indicator. The other thing we need to distinguish between is Montreal and the rest of Quebec. The Montreal CMA represents half the population of the province of Quebec. If we look only at Quebec as a whole, we're not getting a fulsome picture. It's not representative of what, when you use a whole number for Quebec, it doesn't represent Montreal or the rest of the province. Outside of Quebec, there's no problem with the decline of French. It's in Montreal that we're witnessing this issue. So I'll be giving you some figures between starting in 1971. At each census, the percentage of people who use French at home has been declining. Today, that figure is 53%. That same decline exists outside of the island of Montreal, but still within the CMA. So since 1971, it's been going down. But since 2001, every sub-region in Quebec has been declining in their use of French at home. This study has been done by StatCan in 2017, and it was based on the 2011 census. Here we're identifying an acceleration of the decline both on the island of Montreal, the region of Montreal, and the rest of Quebec. So this is a generalized phenomenon. So in the public space, the problem is that there are only 2 languages by definition, but many more languages are actually spoken. So we have serious interpretation issues here. So the second issue with the languages spoken in the public sphere is that there are so many variables. We can always find something. But the indicator we most often turn to, which is the language at work, is difficult to interpret. Why? Because the language used at work doesn't represent people who don't work. We can't use that as an extrapolation for the use of language, generally speaking. Second issue, we don't know, people don't choose the language that they work in. As demographers, we understand that people can be told to work in English or in Italian. So here we're using census data from 2001 to today, and we've registered a decline of French at work. So the second part of my presentation relates to the efficacy of policies. Again, bad news. There are 2 factors that dominate linguistic evolution. So one is fertility and the other one is international immigration. Statistic Canada published an article that said that the number of immigrants and the composition of immigrants has almost no effect. It's ever so slightly slowing the decline of French. It is certainly not reversing the trend. And so I'm trying to respect my time limit, so I'll stop here. Mr. Chair, we can't hear you. I wanted to say thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Termotte, you've respected the timeline. If there's anything you'd like to add or to send us, you can do it while we're asking you questions. So we're going to go through all of the guests before moving on to questions. So for the next 5 minutes, I would like to give the floor to Maître Rousseau. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to come speak to you about some of my research regarding linguistic rights. I just want to plug my recent book, Restaurer le français langue officielle, Restoring French as an Official Language, which I co-authored with François Côté. He's a former Court of Appeals judge. So what we did in the first chapter of this book is a review of scientific literature worldwide on the two main approaches. This is a little theoretical, but you'll see it's important at the end, and I will become more concrete by the end of my talk. So what we've learned regarding linguistic policy is that there are two ways of doing. There's one model that's based on personality. For example, there could be two official languages, and people can choose the one that they want to use in their interactions. So this is a personality-based principle, and the other one is based on territoriality. So here we make sure that in one land there's one official language that is selected by the state, and it's usually the language of the majority of that land. And what we found in our literary review is that it's almost unanimous. This is what we were suspecting, but it was confirmed. So most specialists say that only an approach based on territoriality can ensure the survival of a minority language. For example, Philip Van Parridge says to protect vulnerable languages, there's one thing to use, and that is territoriality. Jean Lavaux says something similar. He says, the one principle that can have long-term success is to concentrate the language in a geographic area. A professor from Université de Montréal says territoriality can establish the security of linguistic communities, and it explains further why the aspect on personality doesn't work. So personality-based principles can seem more generous, but in the fact, it's the majority language that will impose itself. The principle of territoriality can thus be a way of protecting the language of a group that is a minority at the national level, but constitutes the majority in a regional or federated entity, for example, in Quebec, where French is a majority. So this way, we can ensure that the language has the status, is the only official language within it. For a minority that is sufficiently numerous and concentrated in a territory where it constitutes the majority, the principle of territoriality is the most advantageous solution. Philip Van Parridge says it's precisely the awareness of the constant progression of English in Montreal that motivated the demand for a linguistic territoriality regime. Linda Cardinal, who you certainly know, is an expert in language policy worldwide and specifically in Canada, says that the language charter, that with that charter, the Quebec government favors a policy based on the principle of territoriality in order to strengthen French language on its territory. And she adds that a change of model in Canada should serve to further recognize the necessary territorialization of French in order to guarantee its sustainability. And she adds that Quebec should not hesitate to pursue the same path and further promote French in all sectors. So to summarize, the literature is almost unanimous. They really promote a territoriality approach, that Quebec should concentrate its efforts of promoting French in Quebec and in other Francophone regions, which are also close to Quebec, the north of New Brunswick, the east of Ontario. So it doesn't prevent us to have a territoriality-based approach. Tangibly, the federal state should do less for English in Quebec and do more for French. Apply Bill 101. Subsidize French promotion groups in Quebec and have more measures to guarantee the right to work in French in Quebec. Thank you, Mr. Rousseau. You will have more time to speak through members' questions. I'd like to now give the floor to Maître Boileau.
Daniel Boivin.
Boivin, excusez-moi. Excusez-moi, monsieur.
Pardon me, Mr. Boivin. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for your interest in this matter, and thank you very much for having me here to study how we can protect French language in Canada. I'd like to speak to two initiatives that are very important for promoting access to justice in French, and that's the reason why I've been invited. Firstly, the very important reform on official languages and the facts at law. And then I'd like to talk about legal practitioners who speak French outside of Quebec. Firstly, the reforming the Official Languages Act. I've been a lawyer in Quebec for more than 30 years, and I've rarely seen so many people involved in this reform. It's a broader message for the French language community, and the reform is really important to many sectors. And many areas have a lot at stake in the reform. The legal practitioners are happy with the protections that were in the previous law. Section 16 on the protection afforded to individuals that want to be heard in the language of their choice at the Supreme Court level. We hope to find that and other protections in the new legislation. However, some things are not present. For instance, and I'll raise three. Firstly, a better definition of the obligation of Section 7 of the Act. This is Part 7 of promoting French in access to courts is something that's shared between provinces and the federal government. Secondly, affording judges the opportunity to truly sit at the Supreme Court level and elsewhere if they're truly bilingual. And the other thing is the desire to protect access to French in bankruptcy issues. There have been recent changes to divorce law, for instance, and now bankruptcy and insolvency are the next topic where access to French language services is necessary. Moving on to supporting communities, with the action plan for the action plan that's currently in place from 2018 to 2023, we really have to ensure that this is renewed. Protecting access to justice in French can happen through large measures, such as recent reforms on divorce law, on official languages, the appointment of French language judges at their Supreme Court level and elsewhere. But more importantly, beyond these measures, access to justice in French happens through hundreds, if not thousands, of smaller actions that are often not perceived by us, but are really important to people that need access to justice. And this is done through lawyers like me. It's done through associations at provincial levels that work with people in their communities and meet demands that are really local and very specific. 50 seconds. Identifying these small measures that are so important happens by having a place in community associations, and this is afforded through funding. For instance, basic funding that's not tied to a specific project. This enables networks to survive, and we need this type of funding after the end of the current action plan. Thank you, Mr. Boivin. Again, during the questions, you'll be able to expand on what you just said. So we'll start with our first series of questions. The first one, 6 minutes per person. I'll try to politely let you know when you've got about a minute left. So the first round, Joël Godin, 6 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you, Chair. And thank you to our 3 witnesses. Thank you very much for being here. I want to thank you right away because we may not have a lot of time to thank you at the very end. My first question is for Mr. Termotte, and it's with respect to... You spoke to 2 things, actually. The presence of French in a public environment and the presence of French in a private environment. I'd like to focus on the private environment. You said at home. I'd like to ask you the following question. Could you help us parliamentarians, could you help us ensure, and in fact, I share your opinion with respect to the vitality of French language. It happens through the home, and it happens through our childhood. In other words, youth, before they go to elementary school, and currently the government is rolling out a daycare program for all of Canada, and I'm not sure if we intend on demanding that provinces provide French language daycare in minority settings. Is this an avenue, and are there other components that you could suggest to us to help us ensure that in early childhood that people are involved in French language services and that they adopt it? Oh, Mr. Talmot, I think you're on mute. Yes. Thank you very much for the question. I appreciate it. My first reaction as a demographer is that one can only say that that's stating the obvious. However, we need children, don't we? And the problem with the decline of French is related to births. In Quebec, as in the rest of Canada, people are not having children. In the island of Montreal, rather than having 2.1 children per woman, which is to simply sustain the population, 2.1 children per woman, it's 1.2 on the island of Montreal. It's basically half. So there's a huge birth rate problem. And so it's great to say that children from their very early childhood have to be raised in French, but we need children. So until we fix that problem, I think that Quebec and French, really, in Quebec and elsewhere, faces quite a dire future. There are very few people, who change their maternal language. You don't change your language. So I think focusing on immigration may not be the best path forward. So I support your idea, but this is my appeal to you, that we need to ensure that Francophones have more children. Mr. Telma, thank you very much. I think we can understand the fact that we have to be really careful to have enough children to sustain French. However, before we get there, we may need some other measures, such as ensuring that current children learn French. My second question is for Mr. Rousseau. You spoke earlier to two models. Firstly, a personality-based model and then a territory-based model. Could you let me know, please reassure me, can this model be applied in Quebec? And I want to draw a distinction. In Quebec, in Montreal, which is 50% of the population, and the rest of Quebec, and throughout Canada, I'm just wondering, can you explain to me how we could apply this model, this territory-based model, when we are part of a bilingual country where Quebec is perhaps majority French, but there are other realities. So how can we support the presence of French in Quebec and outside Quebec? Thanks very much for the question. So I'll tell you what we could do on a theoretical basis, but then there may be other realities that would not let us achieve an ideal state. But let's go with a theoretical standpoint. Yes, I can see that I only have 1 minute. I'll be quick. So from a theoretical standpoint, we'd say there's one official language in Quebec, which is the case with Bill 101, and then we would have to say the federal government in its services in the working language in Quebec would be French. In other words, the federal state would have the same policy as the provincial government in Quebec, and then it would have the same provincial policy in other provinces in the country. So there might be a way of expanding that to ensure that we have policies that are French-friendly in areas that speak French outside Quebec. So the pure territorial-based model would be that all positions in Quebec would need to be French-speaking. Now, reality is that there will be compromises that we need to reach. Thank you, Mr. Rousseau. So that's the basic principle. Francis Drouin, 6 minutes. Thank you. Thanks to our witnesses and thanks to Mr. Boivin, fellow Franco-Ontarian. Mr. Boivin, you talked about the importance of legal challenges, the Legal Challenges program. I had the opportunity, not myself, but my wife had an opportunity to have a child at the Montfort Hospital in Ottawa. And I think that it's thanks to Ronald Cazin and Madame Lalonde that this hospital still exists. And 20 years later, my baby was born in Montfort. Now, obviously, I didn't do most of the work. My wife did. However, as a family, we had an excellent experience, and it was entirely in French. So I know that you represent a federal association. Do your members still use that program to defend French-speaking communities outside Quebec? Yes. Thanks for the question. It's really important. Absolutely. The Legal Challenges program is really important throughout Canada, not just for our association, but for any community-based association that can ensure that courts hear their challenges. The smaller the community, the more they need access because they don't have the financial resources to be able to support a challenge. And in language laws, sometimes it has to go all the way up to the Supreme Court, which costs a lot of money. Yes, you also mentioned that in the original act there was an exception with respect to the fact that our judges at the Supreme Court had to speak English and or French. Now this exception has been withdrawn. Originally, we were told we need to give legal practitioners the opportunity to adapt and have more schools, for instance, that teach common law. Do you believe that there are a sufficient number of lawyers in French language communities so that they could become judges on the Supreme Court? Or they could be appointed? Yes, thanks for the question. It's also very interesting. The community now has enough legal practitioners for us to hope for appointments on all courts and especially the Supreme Court. French-speaking legal practitioners, Francophiles, legal practitioners that have a excellent fluency that can debate issues at the Supreme Court level. There are many of these. To say that there are too few Francophones, this is something that cannot be supported by the evidence. Thank you. You also said that small associations rely on small gestures. Could you give us a few examples? You told us that it's really important to support small associations, but could you give us local examples? How do they work, whether you have examples to quote with respect to that? In many provinces, our legal practitioners have decided to provide services through local organizations where support is concentrated. So people can go to these centers in order to ask legal questions. Ask, for instance, where can they access specific services or basic counsel so that they can be referred to the right areas. And it's that type of small project that's implemented in a small community that really provides access to justice in French. And this is something that would not happen if they had to turn to a large city to get access. And often, that's too costly for them. Thank you. Mr. Termotte, a few questions with respect to French demographics. I know that you alluded to Montreal, but in my area in Ottawa, for instance, 30 years ago, all French-speaking people were in the Vanier area. Today, Francophones are spread out through the area, and this has an impact on the services and the institutions that provide services. Have you analyzed those issues? Yes? I had an opportunity to do it during a case that's before the courts. And Frédéric Lacroix also worked on it, tried to see which institutions are available in each of the regions for the various linguistic groups. And it just so happens that it's not a real problem in the Ottawa-Gatineau area, neither for the Francophones or Anglophones. Same thing in Montreal. Thank you, Mr. Termotte. You might have another opportunity. No, I understand. Sorry, it's 6 minutes for everybody. And now, Mario Beaulieu, over to you. 6 minutes. Thank you. Thanks very much to all of our witnesses who made fantastic presentations. My first question is to Guillaume Rousseau. To me, the example of the territory-based model, I'm thinking of Switzerland, where there are various possibilities afforded to people in Belgium, or in Wallonia in French, and in Flanders in Flemish. Now, I'm thinking, Could we not have something similar by protecting rights for minority groups? I'm thinking, for instance, that we could have French-based services with support for English minorities. Could you tell us, based on this territorial model, what the impact would be on legislation? Yes. Thank you. So essentially, if I were to summarize something that's quite complex, in a nutshell, in 1977, Bill 101 was really based on the territory, with a few exceptions. And over time, and Mr. Termotte might want to correct me, in the following years, end of the 70s, early 80s, there was much progress made in French. It grew as a working language, and there was increased enrollment in French schools. And then a few decisions came in from the Supreme Court that diminished protection for French language in Quebec. In other words, Bill 101 shifted from a territory-based model to a more personality-based model, and now indicators show that there's a decline in French. So there seems to be a link between the two. So concretely, the territory-based model would be that within Quebec, we will provide more room for French, which means that we would guarantee that people have the right to work in French. There's a fundamental right to be able to work in French. Same for signage. So through a variety of measures, we would promote French, which wouldn't mean that there aren't accommodations for English and other languages. But the principle would be that everything is French, and the rules regarding other languages would be exceptions, not both languages protected at once. So that's one of the reasons why it's preferable to apply Bill 101 to private businesses that are under the federal regime, and to not have it be an exception to the rule. What would be best would be to have the same bill applied to everyone, because the principle is based on protecting French.
I'd just like to follow up on that question. The principle of territoriality would say that French is the common language of public services, so newcomers would be pushed to learn French. But if we leave them the choice between English and French, English is the majority language in Canada, so it might as well learn that language. And the evolution of language since adopting the Official Languages Act is kind of based on individual bilingualism. So it's based on individual rights. And it doesn't work because the rate of assimilation of francophones outside of Quebec keeps increasing. So I was wondering if you agreed with that analysis, and why do you think it's important to apply Bill 101 to private companies that are under federal competence? So the principle on personality can apply regardless of where you are. Regardless of where you are, you can choose the language you like, and it respects individual rights. But when you think about the effects of the survival of a language over generations, using the personality principle doesn't really work, because the dominant language will always win. So you have to think about what the objective is. Is it to make the language thrive or to respect individual rights? So here, the federal language is too focused on linguistic rights, but it doesn't really meet what we're trying to do. So if you talk about Bill 101 and its application to private companies, you have to think about the charter that goes further than C-32 in terms of protecting the right to work in French, which is a fundamental right. You have to understand that the expertise to go to companies and help them be more French belongs to the Office québécois de la langue française. And when you look at how federal institutions are applying the Official Languages Act to private companies like Air Canada, it's not really winning.
Is Mrs. Nikki Ashton. Nikki, your turn.
Merci beaucoup et merci.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the witnesses for appearing here this afternoon. Everything that you've shared with us is so important. It will help us develop recommendations for the government. First, I would like to touch on Mr. Termotte's presentation. I'd like to share my experience. Of course, I'm a Francophile. I live in Manitoba. My first language is not English either. Greek is my mother tongue. But I was lucky to learn French in French immersion. I wanted to give my young children the same opportunity, my twins, who are 5 years old. And I would say that we've been trying to sign them up to the only French daycare in my area. Unfortunately, and COVID is partly to blame, the daycare is lacking staff. They tried to sponsor immigrant women to work in a Francophone daycare. They faced obstacles, and in the end, there's a very long wait list. My children cannot access French education. I'm Francophile, but other families are Francophone. So at the end of the line, despite our willingness to teach French to our kids, they're going to end up in an English daycare. So we're lacking French immigration. We need to prioritize that. And this is becoming an obstacle for the next generation's ability to learn French. I wanted to share that and know what you think about that. Do you think measures like immigration could help support Francophone communities outside of Quebec? I'd love to hear what you think about that. Thank you. That's such an excellent question. It gives me the opportunity to raise an important point. You've said it yourself. It's a daily struggle for Francophones outside of Quebec and Ottawa, of course. But what I'd like to say is that this daily struggle to live in French could allow you and your Francophone and Francophile colleagues to become more French. So I have a demographer's opinion here, a pessimistic one to boot, is that changing languages or saving a language or assimilating takes time. There are very few languages, maybe 10,000 people who change languages every year in Quebec. So you could try and keep your Francophone side that way, but it takes time. It could take 1 or 2 generations before non-Francophone people end up choosing French. And in that time, 1 or 2 generations, there are so many other variables that are having their effects. Immigration continues, and it's mostly not Francophone. So in this particular case, would Francophone or Francophile immigration outside of Quebec solve the problem for people in Manitoba, for example? Of course, yes, it would help them. But it will hinder our ability to attract Francophones in Quebec. So the few people will be able to win due to Francophone immigration outside of Quebec would be really very few people. It will not reverse the trend that we're seeing in the rest of Canada. So I'm not very optimistic. I recognize that it's important, but unfortunately, it wouldn't be enough because we have to look at people's linguistic behavior and groups' linguistic behaviors. I don't know if this answers your question, but I think it's such an important question. I see that I still have 1 minute unless you have a follow-up. I do have a question for your colleague, so I'd like to thank you for what you've shared with us. I think it's very interesting, and I think it's interesting for many parents personally who might be experiencing the same struggle as my family. Quick question for Mr. Boivin. Last October, the Language Commissioner recommended that the Supreme Court of Canada should translate its decisions. I'm surprised that that was not already common practice. So if justice can only be obtained in English, it gives French a second rank. So I would like to know, will translating decisions be done? I would say that the work has started, but this is an important aspect of the official languages reform. Thank you, Mr. Boivin. We're now moving on to the second round of questions. The first one was very interesting. So the second round, as agreed upon earlier, will be comprised of questions that last 5 minutes or 2.5 minutes, depending on the party. So I will announce it as we go around. So the first question goes to Mark Dalton for 5 minutes. On to you. Thank you, and thank you to our witnesses for their presentations. That's excellent. The Liberal government promised to table a bill on modernizing the Official Languages Act. And they finally tabled one at the end of the last session, knowing that there would be an election. So it wasn't adopted. During the election, they promised to table this bill within the first 100 days. But I think it's been 140 days by now. So we've been dragging our feet on this for many years. What would be the negative impacts of this on Francophone communities? Is it very important to modernize the Official Languages Act? Was it important to do it earlier? We definitely need to do it, but we keep saying we need to do it, we need to do it. So what are negative repercussions of not having this modernization of the Act? Who's the question for? To anybody. I'll let our three guests decide to speak, give their perspective, each of them. So let's start with Mr. Rousseau and then Mr. Boivin. Go ahead. Yes, indeed. The federal government is an important player. It's also an important, on the regulatory front, it's also a major employer and it's also a provider of services. So the federal government is promoting English in Quebec through services by funding citizen groups. So instead of promoting more French. There are many other factors. There's international immigration. There's interprovincial immigration or movement, and then also birth rates. So after 50 years of the Official Language Act, with this logic where the federal government protects French outside of Quebec and protects English in Quebec, it is actually accelerating the Anglicization of Montreal. So it's hard to say what influence Quebec, the federal government has, what the provincial government has, private sector, municipalities, etc. But the fact that the federal government has been late in asserting that French is under siege throughout Canada and should do more, even in Montreal and Quebec. So any delay that the federal government has will hurt Quebec, for sure. Mr. Termotte. I'm not exactly qualified to answer this question, but I would say this. Time is of the essence. We forget the importance of time. As demographers, we must take time into consideration. Your question gives me the opportunity to illustrate the future or the outlook of Quebec, the French in Quebec. Let's think about what happened a few decades ago. It still has an effect today. The best example is that we forget that in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, saw an exodus of Anglophones in Quebec. I wouldn't say that French is in a minority group in Montreal. We're at 53% in Montreal. If there hadn't been this enormous English exodus from the 60s to the 80s, we would have been a minority group for a very long time on the island of Montreal. So your question about the impact of time and the delays are very important. Thank you. Mr. Boivin, do you have any comments? 20 seconds. I've been working in this community since 1988, and from the get-go, when I was working on access to justice, the gaps in the Official Languages Act had been underscored. Over the years, we've identified many problems that have caused impacts. Thank you, Mr. Boivin. We'll move on to the next question from Mrs. Latanzio. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests for their testimony. We're getting a lot out of what you're sharing with us. I'd like to start with Mr. Termotte. If I've understood correctly, you're saying that the data you have is based on the census of 2017. We know that when we do a census, we go back 5 years. So you're saying it's data from 2011 or 12. So this demographic snapshot, when you draw conclusions from it, are your conclusions based only on the census? That's my first question. And my second question is about the next census that's coming out very soon. In your opinion, will there be a change, a demographic shift in Quebec, in Montreal, with regards to the decline of French? And third question, which part of the French language is most threatened here in Quebec? These are very rich questions, and I will try to answer as quickly as possible. So let me correct you. The census doesn't give us a portrait of 5 years prior. So in 2016, we get a portrait of the moment. So we can see what we have, and we can compare the evolution from one census to the other. So we can follow immigration from one census to the other. And this is a very important clarification. With regards to public language, the census gives us only information on the language at work, and only since 2001. So 2001 to 2016 is a very short period of time to identify a trend. But it's still a negative trend. And then in terms of the language at work, the indicator that we use is the first official language used. So you choose languages at many moments in a day. So according to Statistics Canada, the first official language spoken publicly. And French has been going down a lot since 2001. And then my predictions for your next question. The predictions we use, the census we used to produce trends, we've made hypotheses about linguistic behavior, immigration, etc. All of our hypotheses are turning out to be true, so we can suspect that what we predicted for 2021 will be confirmed by the census. This is exactly what happened for earlier predictions as well. I've been in this business for 40 years. We've always predicted trends correctly, but sometimes the trends have evolved faster or slowly than we predicted, but they still went in the same direction. I would be very surprised to see the 2021 census contradict the past logic. I don't know if I answered all of your questions. Indeed, Mr. Chair, I have one last question. Which part of the French language is the most threatened right now? So let's forget language at work. What about other parts of language? Oh, the language in cultural activities. The OQLF has published a study. There's not just censuses, Some people do investigations. So there was a study on cultural activity, and it identified major problems. This is normal. The language that people speak to you in stores shows us that there's a problem. Things improved in about 2001, but there's all sorts of other areas. But I don't really have the time to talk about it. Thank you, Mr. Termotte.
Next question, 2.5 minutes, Mr. Mario Beaulieu. Thank you. First question, Mr. Termotte. We can see in the rest of Canada, for instance, Toronto, there's a lot of immigration, but about 100% of new immigrants choose English, and English isn't threatened because English is the lingua franca in the rest of Canada, because French is is in a minority. So if in Quebec we had a more territorial model and that immigrants chose French, now obviously we wouldn't be able to, if there are 50,000 immigrants and about 10,000 linguistic transfers, it wouldn't be sufficient, but overall things would improve. So if we had a territorial-based model, would that protect French? Toronto, in my opinion, is really a territory-based model. Territoriality is not only what happens in Switzerland and Belgium. If you're an immigrant in Toronto and you want to speak English, you have no choice. If you're an immigrant, whatever your mother language in Rome, you'll speak Italian because the territorial-based model applies regardless of the law. So in Quebec, if we could have a little bit of help, we might be able to make some inroads. If we could increase transfers to French, it would be great. We're told up to 10,000 people change languages in all directions, not just immigrations that choose English or French, but also English or English-speaking people that change to French and vice versa. So overall, we're talking about 6, 7, maybe 10,000 language transfers in Quebec. So we would need a net gain, an annual net gain of about 2,000. So with new measures, could we move from 2,000 to 4,000? And 2,000 is is very low in any case. That's not going to do anything to compensate for the lack of fertility. Sorry, I think we're out of time. Thanks very much. Thanks, Mr. Termotte. The next question will be from Nikki Ashton. 2.5 minutes. Over to you. Thank you very much. Mr. Termotte, I wanted to come back to what you said about improving home-based learning of French. And I also wanted to raise the lack of access to education in French for early childhood outside Quebec. I also wanted to ask something with respect to agreements on the funds that were provided by the federal government for daycare with each of the provinces. We know that all provinces have an agreement outside of Ontario with the government for that. So I wanted to ask you, do you think the government missed an opportunity to increase the vitality in French by not including French in these agreements with provinces to provide daycare? Should there have been a provision with respect to that? I don't feel competent to answer that question. I can understand why you're asking it. However, obviously, you can always say that you missed an opportunity, but I'm not qualified to answer that. You really need a case-by-case study for that. From one province to the other, things are different. But I would come back to what I said earlier. Despite everything you've done, you and your Francophile friends, that's not what's going to change the trends. It may slow down the decline, but it won't reverse the trend. Mr. Rousseau, did you have something to share with respect to that? Yes, thanks very much. I wanted to draw your attention to the appeals court decision recently. It's a different case because we're talking about a transfer with respect to employment. But if you think of daycares, it's quite similar. There could be obligations to promote, for instance, French in other provinces, but we wouldn't want the federal government to demand that Quebec promote English in Quebec. Thank you, Mr. Rousseau. The next question for 5 minutes.
It's your turn, Mrs. Gladue.
Merci et merci.
Thank you. Thanks to our witnesses. I'll start with a question for Mr. Boivin. When I was on the Status of Women Committee, we heard that there were insufficient services for women. And in Sarnia, where I live, Ontario has deemed that we're a French-speaking community, and it's been the case for 2 months. However, we don't have any access to French language services. So how can we get legal practitioners who speak French in my area? That's a great example of the fact that we need to provide resources to community-based organizations to address some of those issues, to tie in the various sectors that require services, seniors, women, education, healthcare, and identify individuals that could bridge those gaps, either by coming to your area permanently or by establishing some sort of a network in other cities. So your community is close to larger communities where there are French-speaking services. In other areas, it's not the case. So we need to find the funding to address these issues. Otherwise, communities will not have access to French language services. Another question now for Mr. Rousseau. Could you say a few words on territoriality in Ontario? Because we have too few francophones in some areas in Toronto, or in Ontario, rather. So if we were to apply a territory-based model in Ontario, it would mean that we would have to identify the areas where there's a sufficient number of francophones, and then we would try and promote French. So there was a bill where we said we need to provide the right to work in French in Quebec and in other areas where there's a critical mass of French language speakers, for instance, northeastern Ontario. Evidence shows us that by concentrating those efforts where there is a critical mass, we can ensure better vitality over time. Thank you. And one question for Mr. Termotte. You talked about families in Montreal, but what should we do to improve the percentage of people in Montreal who use French at work? It's a really relevant question. In a normal society, a person who speaks a language at home, when they leave their home to go to work or to a store, they'll speak the same language. In a normal society, that's how things work. Except in areas close to a border or areas like Montreal, where, for instance, if you're an immigrant and you don't speak either official language, you have to pick. You have to pick one of the official languages. And therefore, you'll choose a language. And as an immigrant, you may not always choose the language you speak at work. And that's why I think it's important to follow this indicator. We carried out a number of studies that show that people who leave their home try to speak the same language, but they can't always. And that's why I think Mr. Arsenault and Mr. Boivin need to be supported. Now, will things improve? I'm quite pessimistic. But however, we have to keep focusing on it. But it's insufficient. The impact of international immigration and fertility is too large for us to compensate with policy. The next person would be Angelo Iacono for 5 minutes. Over to you. Thank you, Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. Thanks for being here today. My first question is for Professor Rousseau. As a Quebecer, I agree with you with respect to protecting and promoting French in order to ensure its survival in an area where English is more prominent. However, how can we maintain a balance with protecting and promoting French outside Quebec? This would lead us to what we call an asymmetrical approach. Traditionally, we had a symmetrical approach. So the federal state would say, I'll protect rights and I'll promote the minority language, so French in other provinces, and symmetrically, we'll have something similar in Quebec. We'll protect English-speaking Quebecers and promote English. So we had a symmetrical approach. We understand why, from a political standpoint, it was a compromise, and it may have seemed logical, but 54 years later, this symmetrical approach has a negative impact on French in Quebec, and in other provinces, it helps French a little bit. It may help a few individuals, a few small communities, and it protects their fundamental rights. But if you look at the impact overall. It has a very limited impact in other provinces, and it still promotes English in Quebec, and there's an imbalance. So we need to break free from this model and find an asymmetrical approach where the federal government would not treat English the same way it does French in other provinces. Thank you. Next question for Professor Termotte. As a demographer, what could we do to improve the demographic weight of Francophones in Canada? How can we promote French in Quebec and all the while protect French-speaking Canadians outside Quebec? Well, that's an important question for a demographer such as me. I already said a lot about the lack of fertility. However, I don't know how we can act on that. We can't say that from now on, only, for instance, French language mothers will get support. That's inconsistent with our Constitution. So we can't impact that. So the only thing we can impact is immigration and ensuring that immigrants choose French as a language. But there was a study last year that said that you could increase the number of French-speaking immigrants regardless of their provenance. It has no impact. We can have working assumptions to determine how quickly the decline would slow. We may be able to slow the decline somewhat, but no more. So as a demographer, I have to tell you that unfortunately, over the past 40 years, our assumptions have all led to the same result. Nobody is pessimistic because they enjoy it. We have working assumptions on birth rates, death rates, immigration rates, and so on and so forth. And we create scenarios. Nobody has ever challenged these scenarios. They're always more or less right. And unfortunately, the result is not what we're looking for. Thank you. And in that case, what means could we use outside legislation to foster the use of French in various areas, but especially new immigrants, new Canadians? The average age of new Canadians is 32, in Quebec anyway. So the average immigrant in Quebec is 32. At that age, it's very difficult to change your language. Changes happen at a very young age, between 5 and 14. When you go to elementary school and then high school, after that, it's very difficult. Thank you. That's it for now. I'm sorry if that was an abrupt break to your conversation, but we need to give everybody the opportunity to ask you questions, to ask some questions. Now we can have a very rare third round of questions, and this one will start with Mr. Jacques Gould. 5 minutes. Mr. Gould, over to you. Sorry, I took my headset off. Give me 1 second. Mr. Chair, this is our 4th round, not the 3rd. Is that the case? No, it's the 3rd. It's the 3rd round. It's the 4th? Even better. It's a rare occasion. Mr. Gould, over to you. My colleague had to leave, so I've been assigned to this committee, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much to our witnesses for... Sorry? So, as you know, we'll be very shortly starting a study on the new legislation on official languages. Are there suggestions, recommendations that the witnesses would like to leave with us for this new legislation? And you can speak to it one after the other, please. Mr. Rousseau? Yes, thanks for the question. Now, C32 is a good basis. If that could be tabled, then there could be a few amendments. In C32, there's a start of a paradigm shift. So the federal state understands that it cannot treat French and English in the same fashion. We can't say, well, protect English in Quebec and French in other provinces. The federal government has to understand that French is declining in Quebec, especially in Montreal, and put extra effort in that area. So that reflection had started in C32, but now we really need to take it further. More concretely, I see three things. Applying Bill 101 to businesses that are federally regulated. To me, that is better than what was suggested in C32, where there was an option between Bill 01 or a federal equivalent with provisions in the Act that are based on 101 but don't go quite as far. So I think it's preferable to use Bill 101 because the expertise in supporting private businesses in order to ensure that French is the language spoken at work is why the Office de la langue française exists. And so for consistency and because Bill 101, once it's modified by Bill 96, will go further than what was provided for in the Federal Act. And by including it in a federal legislation with use of Bill 101, this federal legislation could protect the right to work in French in French-speaking languages outside of Quebec, especially those around Quebec. So there is a way of doing both, but for Quebec, applying Bill 101 to me is preferable. And also there's a lot of work to do for civil servants in Ottawa that would like to work in French. 44% of French-speaking civil servants say that they're uncomfortable speaking French. I think we have to make sure that both languages are not seen the same because then English becomes dominant. There needs to be more room for French everywhere in federal buildings, which doesn't mean that some services won't be provided in English, but we really have to provide priority to French because, in fact, English is dominant. So the legislation has to provide a better balance. And then we have to make sure that federal subsidies, we talked about culture, federal subsidies for culture and citizens groups have to be for people that promote French language culture, not only groups that promote culture in other languages.
Do we have time for another witness? Mr. Termotte? I can support what was just said. We have to reinforce the principle of territoriality in the law. Where are we at? We have some good examples, but is it enough? As a demographer, I would say that what's critical is the future of fertility. Yeah, we could add a few thousand people every year with certain measures, but with territoriality and what has gone on in Belgium, territoriality is applied in Wallonia, but not in Brussels. But 90% of immigrants go to Brussels and speak French. One thing we could do is focus on the number of children in families that immigrate. Thank you, Mr. Termotte. Next question from Marc Serré. 5 minutes. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our three witnesses. Thank you for speaking to us today. I'd like to ask my first question to Mr. Boivin. And like my colleague mentioned earlier, thank you for the work that you do for Francophonie. You answered my first question a little bit with the matter of lawyers and qualifications, how many there are. But I'd like to widen the discussion and get your recommendation. In the federal level, there are selection committees that look into finding jurists in the northeast of Ontario, etc. But if we look at Ontario as a whole, Sarnia-Lambton that was mentioned, what would your recommendation be to expand the number of bilingual jurists? Is this based on the population? Do we impose quotas? Because you have to think of the population of Ontario, but what about Manitoba, Alberta, other provinces, to make sure that there are more bilingual lawyers and legal professionals? What's your recommendation? It will be very important in the action plan or in the Official Languages Act that we give communities the power to bring back Francophones to areas where Francophonie is not as vast. I assume that my colleague, Professor Rousseau, who is advocating for the territorial approach, is not barring any measures that would encourage small communities that are not close to the greater centers to get this kind of protection. So to give these communities the power to bring back their Francophones so that they can contribute to their Francophone communities, that's important. And bringing professionals back can happen when you give them a healthy Francophone community that gives them the desire to return. What you say makes me think of another question. When we think about Mr. Rousseau's territorial approach, I have issues with this. If we look at immersion, in the south of Ontario, for example, other places. I'm not asking you if you're contradicting Mr. Rousseau when we talk about areas outside of Quebec, because it seems like it would cause more problems for Francophones that are in a minority stance if you adopt Mr. Rousseau's approach. Yes, I can react. What you have to understand here is that there could be tension between the scientific literature, which is very clear, almost unanimous. If you want to guarantee that a language in a minority situation thrives, you have to concentrate the state's efforts in the areas where that language is spoken most. So for French, it's Quebec, the north of New Brunswick, and the east of Ontario. So that's the scientific approach. Of course, for political reasons, there could be other reasons to promote French in other areas. And yes, we can make a distinction between science and political factors that come into play. But we also have to differentiate the two objectives. One is to have the language thrive, which would require the territorial approach. And then the other objective was to respect individual rights. So if we're thinking about territoriality, we're not going to put efforts there. But then for individual rights, it might be justified to put in those efforts there. Mr. Termotte, do you have any specific recommendations regarding data collection? Are there any question recommendations? You know, we're talking about frequency of the census, but do you think there should be more questions that would allow the federal government to do better data collection? 15 seconds. The Canadian census is an example of linguistic data collection. We're among the best in the world. In Switzerland, they had included in their census questions, what language do you think it? I'm sorry, your time is up. The next person to pose questions will be Mario Beaulieu for 2.5 minutes. So let's talk about Bill C-32. Many jurists in Quebec said that the government of Quebec could apply Bill 111 on federally regulated businesses. Would this prevent the government of Quebec from applying Bill 101? And second question, quickly, some people have said that the Official Languages Act will just copy Bill 101. But what we saw in C-32 is that for the part on the Official Languages Act, we say that you have the right to work in French, but you also have the right to work in English. So it's always this bilingual approach that is the central axis of the Official Languages Act. So will Bill C-32 prevent Quebec from applying Bill 101? And then would the Official Languages Act be a copy-paste of Bill 101? So legally, what you need to understand is that the application of the law on federally regulated private sector companies has two parts. One, it's a federal jurisdiction, and then there's also provincial jurisdiction. Both apply. But if there's a conflict between the two, the federal preponderance applies. If there is a federal law that conflicts with the provincial law, then the federal law applies. So yes, it's dangerous that the federal government would write laws about areas that are covered by provincial laws, because then it would win out. Bill C-32 goes further than Bill 101, and then there's other laws that go even further than that. But what's interesting here is that we're taking inspiration from Bill 101 for regions outside of Quebec. I would say that the regions that are close to Quebec, the north of New Brunswick, the east of Ontario, Labrador, maybe some other areas, but that would essentially be it. So we have to do both. Bill 101 that applies to federally regulated companies, and then federally we have to defend the right to work in French. Good job respecting the time. Next question is from Joël Godin. You have 5 minutes. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Mr. Rousseau. You said in your presentation that Madame Cardinal said, I'm sorry, I didn't note her title and background, but you said there would be a change of model, but that Quebec has to go forward. There's a bit of a contradiction here. Can you explain us more? Yes, I think what Mrs. Cardinal says, let me just go back, but on one hand, she says that for Quebec, we should adopt the territoriality model with some exceptions, and then Quebec should reinforce its territorial model. On the other hand, generally in Canada, with regards to federal policies, it should be focused on personality, and maybe the model should be changed there to be a little bit more territorial and to have an asymmetrical approach. And that way, the federal government wouldn't grant equal weight to both language and would really work on protecting French. And the federal government should promote it more, including in Quebec. And that's where we would have a paradigm shift compared to the federal government's traditional approach, where they promote French in other provinces and English in Quebec. I'm going to continue with you. If I understand correctly, if C-32 is repeated in the new bill on modernizing the Official Languages Act, we offer workers in Quebec the choice to work in the language of their choice, be it English or French. I would like to remind you that the objective of our study is to find the government measures to protect and promote French in Quebec and in Canada. Would this rule in Bill C-32 meet the objectives of promoting and protecting French in Quebec when we don't force people to work French and we indeed give them the choice in federally regulated private sector companies? Indeed, if we want to promote French, we have to protect the right to work in French more than the right to work in English. This is the Charte de la langue française's principle. So you have a right to work in French. We're not forbidding people from working English, but French is a fundamental right. So the federal bill could follow that lead and say that there's a fundamental right to work in French in Quebec and other high French concentration areas. And this would be one way to take inspiration from the Charte de la langue française. Are you saying that we should write "we must" instead of "we can" in the modernization project? That's my comment. Thank you for the clarification. You said that French immigration doesn't have an effect on declining French in Canada. You said that Francophones should have more children, and you said that immigration is not a solution to prevent the decline. So what do we do with French immigration? Oh, no, we need immigration. We need Francophone immigration. It's obvious. But what Statistics Canada's data has shown us is that even if you increase the number of Francophone immigrants, if you said all immigrants to Quebec are Francophones, you have to come from a country that has French as an official language. Even that only slowly slows the declining trend. Why? Because there are other factors that come into other play. When we talk about immigration, we forget that the percentage of immigrants in Quebec is 12%. So we're trying to play with this 12%. And the reason we focus on immigration is because we can't force people to have babies. And I have to say, we're asking immigrants a lot. We're asking them to go outside of urban centers. They don't want to go there. We're asking people to have kids. And we're asking them to speak French from one day to the next. And even if we asked everyone to do that, they wouldn't necessarily do that. But you know what? I'd like to add, Mr. Termotte, that living outside of the cities is fantastic. Thank you, and I support Mr. Godin's comment as well. Madame Ashton, I skipped you earlier. You have 2 minutes and a half. You're next. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to add a comment for Mr. Termotte. I think that your demographic perspective is so interesting. I would share that, according to me, there are obvious things that the government can do to tackle denatality. I'm a woman who just had kids. I know that many women from my generation can't even think about it because it's so expensive to have children. Whether we think about the cost of daycare, where in Quebec things are better, if we think about housing, if we think about the cost of living, I think it's important to draw a connection between the decline of French and the obstacles that many women face when deciding to have children and how many children to have. My question is about the urgency. You shared data today that is interesting and also very concerning. What would you say is the degree of urgency that the government act? Is this an urgent matter? Do we need to act now? Do we need to tackle the declining use of French now? Let's start with Mr. Termotte and then Mr. Rousseau. And then Mr. Boivin. So to answer your first question, of course it's urgent. More time passes, worse the problem gets. Francophones are already on the brink of becoming a minority in Montreal. If you look at Statistics Canada's numbers and draw a trend, they'd be in minority by 2040. What are Francophones supposed to do when they see the majority of the people that surround them are not Francophones? They're not going to choose French. They will choose to be a part of the majority. I'd like to come back to Mr. Godin's question. He asked if we say we should instead of we must. If we give people the choice, immigrants always choose the majority language, the most socially prestigious language. To complete this third round, because we're currently finishing the third round of questions, I'd like to give the floor to Ariel Kayabaga, who has 5 minutes. You have the floor. We can't hear you. Can you hear me now? Thank you. Thank you to our witnesses who have taken the time to speak with us today and answer our questions. I've been writing notes during this conversation. I have questions. For Mr. Rousseau, you've talked about the principle of territoriality. Here's my question. Can you explain how that can work outside of Quebec? For Francophones who are living in a minority situation, for example, Franco-Ontarians, how do you see this principle working in that kind of setting? Do you think that Francophones will be left behind if they are not in Quebec? Do you want me to ask all of my questions in one shot, or do you want to answer and come back? I'll let you answer the question. Go ahead.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thanks for the question. If we apply the territorial principle outside Quebec, what we could do is say what's happening now in terms of protecting linguistic rights of French-speaking people outside of Quebec. That's the minimum. So we want the government, the federal government, to do more for French, not just for individual rights, but to make sure that French is still spoken in many generations to come. That's where we have to focus our efforts geographically. So essentially, we would need the government, the federal government, to say you have the right to work in French where there are sufficient Francophones. So Eastern Ontario and Northern New Brunswick. So there should be a basis that applies everywhere, and then something above and beyond based on the critical mass. And that's how we would apply the territorial basis outside Quebec, but close to Quebec. So it would reinforce Quebec's policies as well. Thank you very much for the answer. In the same vein, how would you see Francophones living in minority settings? So you said how it could work in Quebec and how we could identify minority language settings. However, how could we ensure that it's not just in Quebec? And you also mentioned something else. For Bill 101, you said, with respect to work, that we should apply Bill 101 at work. Would that mean that other minority languages in Quebec would not be protected? I'm not sure I'm making myself understood. So with respect to your last question, there's always a bit of tension. For instance, you'll have the right to work in French, and in other legislations, including Quebec legislation, there's a right to have services in other languages. So if you ask a civil servant to provide services in English, obviously that means that they aren't working in French, and vice versa. So you have to understand that this tension is constant, and it's inherent to legislation. You can't provide 100% of one or 100% of the other. There's always a balance. So if you were to provide a lot of services in other languages, you would reduce the right to work in French and vice versa. So you have to find a compromise. It will never be completely satisfactory to everybody. Now, with respect to other French communities outside Quebec, you really have to look at where they are. Are they in an area where there's a lot of French? In that case, I think we need to provide more rights to work in French, and it has to be realistic. Would it be realistic in Manitoba, very far from Winnipeg? Probably not. So if we focus on areas that are close to Quebec, there should be a positive impact on individual rights and on the protection of the French language over time. Thank you, Mr. Rousseau. Given that we are very disciplined, we'll be able to move on to a fourth round of questions. However, for those of you that were meant to ask 5-minute questions, I'll reduce it to 2 minutes. And for those that were going to ask a 2.5-minute question, it'll be 1 minute so that we can give a turn to everybody. And I think that that's a record. In my 6 years on the Hill, I don't think I've ever seen this before. 4 rounds. Mr. Dalton, you're next. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Wonderful. Thank you. So I was somewhat encouraged by what you said, because I thought that immigration was responsible for the French decline in Montreal. But based on what you said, Mr. Termotte, you said that really that's kind of improved. So I'm not understanding why there's a decline. Is it that Netflix, movies, music is more English? Can you expand? Yes, absolutely. And that's a relevant question. It's not immigration who's the main that is the main cause. The studies I spoke to show it quite clearly. The main cause is sub-replacement fertility. And I really liked what Ms. Ashton said. We're asking a lot of women. Imagine a policy where you would support fertility. I mean, that's saying to women, if you make babies, we'll give you money. Very few women are of childbearing years. A few 100,000 in Quebec every year. So if you focus only on that, it's not useful socially, ethically, on other fronts as well. So we're basically tinkering on the edges. Stascan or myself, we're very logical when we conduct these studies. And then Francis Drouin for 2 minutes as well. Over to you. Thank you. I have 2 questions for Mr. Rousseau and Mr. Termotte regarding globalization. We know that youth spend a lot more time in virtual environments where legislation doesn't really apply, or it's limited. So in academia, how do you study that? How can you influence French abroad. Yes, we have partners, for instance, France and other French-speaking countries, but I have a hard time understanding how we could ensure that we would protect French in a virtual world. I don't know if you talk about this in academia. Mr. Rousseau, go ahead. I'll start then. Yes, we have these conversations because it's quite timely. So quickly, language laws apply to the internet. So Bill 101, when it says you have to have ads in French, it has an impact on the business and on employees because somebody has to prepare the ad in French, so it has an impact on the languages used at work. And secondly, don't forget that if you promote French in the physical, real world, for instance, if there are shows and concerts in French, it will have an impact on virtual consumption. And then there's the idea of quotas that should apply to Netflix and YouTube, but that's for another committee. Thank you very much, Mr. Rousseau. Good job. Next one. Mr. Mario Beaulieu, you only have 1 minute. So go ahead. Mr. Termotte, quite quickly, I don't think that English-speaking people have higher birth rates than we do they? Fertility rates, the number of children per woman is a little bit higher in English-speaking communities. But they're in the same boat as we are. However, they proportionally gain a lot from language transfers. Yes, really quickly. So if we were to increase French immigration and that we had a more territory-based model that would increase linguistic transfers into French, then we could reverse the trend. In Wallonia, immigration doesn't diminish the presence of French. But in Wallonia, it's territoriality and nothing else. Thank you, Mr. Termotte. I apologize, but that's it. Ms. Nikki Ashton, 1 minute. Thank you very much. Thanks again to all our witnesses. With respect to the problem, how urgent is it? I'd like to let Mr. Rousseau speak to this emergency, and Mr. Boivin as well. How urgent is this problem? Quite quickly, I think that for Montreal, we've got a burning platform. I think that we need an initiative where the government of Quebec, the government of Canada, the various municipalities in Montreal could adopt together with private business, for instance, an urgent plan. I think that that's an initiative that would be welcomed by most people. There was a decision at the appeal court last week that talked about the application of Part 7 of the Official Languages Act. And in BC, it's been shown that if we don't repair some of the damages, some communities will disappear. Thank you, Mr. Boivin. And Joël Godin, you've got 2 minutes. Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. Rousseau. You told my friend across the way that other committees should look at controlling the digital space. We're in the era of the digital space, and we're also in the era of modernizing the Official Languages Act. So we'll have to live with this act for 20, 30, 40, 50 years to come. If it's well done, I think it'll be important for the generations to come. I think that in this act, we should control French. I don't have the solution. It's not an easy file. The rules are complicated, but I believe in the fact that if we promote French in cultural activities, but if you look at other countries and other areas on this planet, some people want to speak French. It's fashionable. So we have to promote French. So how could we, and obviously time's flying by, but how could we identify measures we can take now to ensure that this is included in the official languages Act modernization? Now, I know that I'm asking you a lot in a minute or 30 seconds even. Thank you. Really quickly, quotas from the CRTC for radio should apply to YouTube, to all sorts of digital platforms. That's the first thing. Secondly, I think that we could easily ensure that in the right to work in French in Quebec and in other French-speaking areas, that we insist on technology. We have to put an emphasis on technology to ensure that employers have to provide software in French. And there again, we could apply Bill 101 in Quebec and use a form of similar bill elsewhere. Thank you. Last question, 2 minutes for Ms. Latanzio. Thank you, Chair. And my question is for Mr. Rousseau. Mr. Rousseau, English-speaking individuals and their community in Quebec says that they're trying to learn French. There is even school boards throughout Quebec. And in fact, in Montreal, students go to bilingual schools. They go to French immersion. So our youth, and I can tell you that even my children have all been educated through French immersion. So I'm very happy today to have children that speak both English and French. So we say we've made a lot of efforts, and there is a fear in the English-speaking community saying we are doing a lot. So why do we need to focus so much on French? Yes, we want to improve the status of French, but we also want to ensure that people get services in English. So to tie this back into what you said earlier, you said, how can we find a balance between both languages to ensure that this minority language community continues to get services in its language? So with respect to schools, elementary and high schools, a lot has been done. There's a lot more French since Bill 101, so after 1977. So we could look for some adjustments, but I think we can find a balance for elementary and high school. In my opinion, English school boards are not threatened. Now we have to work on CEGEPs and university, in research funding, and there's much more research funded in English-speaking universities than French-speaking universities. Thank you. I apologize to our witnesses. I apologize for cutting you off so much, but what I can tell you that you can communicate with our clerk any information that you would have liked to provide that we didn't have time for. So at any time, send us information if you feel that it's useful, and will be shared with all the members of this committee. So this will end our meeting. I've never seen in 6 years 4 rounds of questions. That says a lot about the quality of our questions, the discipline of our colleagues, and the quality of our hybrid model. All of this works well. Thank you to the analysts, the clerk, to our techs as well. Thanks. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Merci aux témoins.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci au personnel de soutien. Hein? Et Madame la greffière, ça a été probablement le point